Oh man, My Hero Academia Chapter 387, titled Congealed, was a long time coming. If you are a veteran member of the plot army, then you already know what time it is, because we have waited over 2 years for this. To kick things off, we would have the appearance of a rather effeminate and pretty face that was somewhat familiar on two fronts. And according to him, Himura blood runs thick. That back in the day, long before the advent of quirks, there was a Himura village chief that established several branch families. They earned such an abundance of pride and wealth that not even the 1947 emancipation of farmland, a government mandate that saw the major sale of land to the farmers who worked them, had any effect on their success. This bound and shackled person was then explained to be Gaten the Iceman, lieutenant of the Paranormal Liberation Front. Gaten would admit, however, that the rise of quirks resulted in the decline and downfall of this once thoroughly established clan, mainly because they so thoroughly hated the idea of diluting their bloodline. As listening to this account from another cell would be the former League of Villains member, Mr. Compress. This talk of pedigree obsession and loathing of heteromorphs made him wonder what his buddy Spinner would say. According to Gaten, they kept marriages inside the family between members of different branches. Now, they might sound like inbred jerks marrying their cousins, but depending on how long this family was in power before this mandate, this could be the equivalent of Sasuke Uchiha marrying Hinata Hyuga. If you're not too familiar with Naruto, sorry, but it is one of Horikoshi's all-time favorites, and there's even some inspiration from that series coming up in just a bit. Mr. Compress was honestly a bit thrown off by how this family decided to strengthen their bloodline. But Gaten would continue his story by saying that on account of being so distant and closed off from the outside world, the Himura clan dwindled as time went on. What ultimately sealed the deal for these guys was when the main family began to sell itself off. When that became the case, the remaining branch families scattered. Gaten was one of them, and eventually, Redestro recruited him. And for someone with nothing left, whose life was, in a way, destroyed by quirk society, it had to have been an easy sell. With each passing generation, quirks are said to grow in strength and complexity, as along with a shot of Dabi's ribcage, it would be said that quirks intensify as different factors mix together, and that Gaten wouldn't be surprised if someone possessed latent abilities they were unaware of. That when people set aside their hearts and chase after that power, he wonders what sort of future it would bring. Like I said, definitely some level of Naruto inspiration to be had here, namely in the form of Haku of the Ice Release, an effeminate young man who belonged to a once powerful clan ruined by prejudice, that was taken in by an older criminal with a long-standing grudge towards the country of their birth due to the modern ways of its society. Mr. Compress wasn't sure how to respond, but Gaten was in a talkative mood, and so he'd urge his prison companion to go next, even suggesting that he begin with what he was talking about with the cops and heroes. Gaten was fine with talking about anything, since all they could do was kill time until the war was over. Now, if it wasn't abundantly clear already, Gaten is related to Shoto and all his siblings by way of their mother Rei, and that's also why he looks so much like her. Back when he fought Dabi, we made it clear that a deeper connection between the two was pretty much a definite. Considering his face was hidden all throughout that battle, at first we wondered if he might actually be Natsu in disguise. This isn't the first time we've seen his complete face, but thankfully, we now have complete confirmation of their connection. From there, we'd then be taken about half a mile away from the ruins of the Gunga Mountain Villa, as an unfathomable heat would scorch the earth. Within this inferno was a somewhat downed Endeavor being heckled by the deathly cackles of his eldest son. And thanks to All For One, Endeavor was now missing an entire arm. As he gritted his teeth while listening to a struggling communicator, Endeavor was unhappy to learn that not too long from now, his son Toya was going to violently explode. Not only did this place the evacuation blocks in danger, which contained his family mind you, but Pixie Bob and the other heroes fighting against Toga's mob were within range too. As like an unholy wraith from hell, Dabi descended upon his broken father from above. As he did, it was all too clear to Endeavor that the damage he had sustained from his fight against All For One was drastically slowing him down. And with that, he didn't believe he'd be able to lure his son away any further. Dabi would then call out to his father while telling him to look at him, the very desire he has so repeatedly expressed in the past. But this time, there was no doubt that Dabi had his father's undivided attention. But again, this barely recognizable villain would demand that his father continue to look as he raided a fiery, if not molten fist, as Endeavor did just as his son demanded and looked. But all he could see was his little boy. back when the smile on Toya's face was one of genuine innocence and enthusiasm. And looking at this impressively formed fiery fist, it's made all too clear just how proficient the boy was with this quirk. I'd even be amazed to see Shoto pull off this sort of refined shape control with his fire. And that was when Toya was a kid. Now, his fiery fist was several hundred times bigger than him, as it absolutely decimated the ground beneath them and propelled Endeavor away with tremendous force. The ground was pretty much volcanic as Endeavor reeled from the mighty blow. But Dabi wasn't done just yet. As his body fell apart and the very arm he had just used was completely destroyed, he'd rush in towards his father and swiftly grab hold of him as if to personally drag the man down to hell with him. Endeavor would beg his son to put out his flames, as Dabi in his crazed state would continue to beckon his father's vigilant watch. Endeavor would continue to plead by saying that he doesn't want Toya to die. But Dabi is a villain through and through. He knew all too well what was within his blast radius and would begin to call out to his once beloved little brother Natsu, wondering if he wanted to play together like old times. And to make matters worse, Endeavor was losing consciousness here. The heat his son was emitting was just too much. It was hot enough to burn even him. It was a wonder how Dabi was even still alive at this point. But that's when Endeavor would begin to notice something even stranger. As he touched upon the phosphor-empowered portion of his son's chest, Endeavor's eyes would widen. It would then be said that when a person experiences a near-death experience, it may at times cause their quirk to awaken. The example being Bakugo towards the end of the First War. And despite his flesh singeing away, Endeavor refused to take his eyes off of Toya. It would furthermore be said that in certain cases, some people manifest what may be considered to be hysterical strength, which was something a bit different from an awakening. A power which only blooms when someone is on the verge of death. The reason for the distinction here is that in theory, hysterical strength is something that was always possessed and merely forced out by dire circumstances, as opposed to being an environmental mutation like quirk awakening. As his face began to be consumed by the flames, Endeavor could not take his eyes off of his son for even a single second. As yet again, plot armor continues to accurately predict the trajectory of this story. Dabi has ice. Dabi has his mother's quirk. I know some people complain when we talk about how right we have been, but honestly, this isn't for you anyways. This is for the people that have and continue to love what we do here. Because Danger Sense predicted it. Deku's final quirk predicted it. The entire First War, along with its intricate outcomes and developments, predicted it months before the war even happened. Mina's Acid Man technique predicted it. The UA Traitor predicted it. Toga using twice his blood predicted it. Dabi becoming a zombie predicted it. Dabi having ice predicted it, along with exactly how it ended up happening. This one took a long time to come true, so I'm sure you can imagine how hyped KJ and I were to read this one. Back then, we dedicated the entire week to making Dabi videos, and it is still one of our fondest memories of making content for you guys. We even made it to the trending page for the first time back then. So whether you've been with us for years or this is the very first time you've ever seen our stuff, thank you so much. Anyways, Endeavor's reaction to this was priceless. Pretty much every moment he'd ever had in the series would flash back before his eyes as he realized the son he had abandoned for being a failure was anything but. And clearly, based on how far he's come, even the concern that his quirk would ruin his body wasn't such a big deal. Endeavor would recall his previous sentiment that today he'd win and keep his eyes on Toya. And that is exactly what he intended to do. As his son clung to him, Endeavor truly saw him beyond the flames. As Dabi's body entered its final stages towards detonation, Endeavor would plainly look at him while admitting that all of this was his responsibility. He'd go on to say that he believed he needed to bear this burden and stay alive to make amends for what he had done. But Toya had been looking at him for all these years, and in turn, he turned his eyes away. What he needed to do was make amends with his son as well, which I'm surprised he's only just realizing, but I guess Endeavor isn't exactly the most emotionally intelligent guy in the world, so it's only natural. Endeavor would also recall the recurring dream he was having of his family all being together without him. He believed that the time for him to die had finally come. With his face horribly burned, Endeavor would promise not to let his son die alone. But as he clung to his boy with all his remaining strength, the #1 hero would vow not to let him drag anyone else into their mess either. As he began to propel upwards with Dabi, he knew all too well that they wouldn't be able to make it far enough if they remained on the ground. Dabi was very clearly on the verge of an explosive death as Endeavor desperately tried his best to make it in time. He needed more time, as to suddenly buy him some would be the appearance of his estranged wife, Rei, who through the use of her ice was able to resist the insane heat and cool the body of her eldest son. That Himura blood is really no joke, and Endeavor was beyond shocked to see his once docile civilian wife fearlessly entering the fray. And as half of her face scarred and burned as if to make amends for doing so to her youngest son Shoto, Rei would recall the striking words that a young Toya once shared with her, that she was just as guilty as Endeavor. And that is precisely why she is here. This Todoroki family subplot continues to be one of the best aspects of the entire series. We're going to be responding to plenty of comments on this one, so please let us know what you guys think about this chapter. As always, I'm Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.